My dad never missed a shift report. Not once in 22 years. Even when he was sick, he'd drag himself home smelling like dust and diesel, and that dry sweet wheat smell that clung to your hair. And he'd sit at the kitchen table, with a pen, like it was the last thing keeping the world in order. He'd fill out the incident log, the maintenance notes, the safety checklist, every stupid little box that management pretended to care about until it cost them money. He used to tell me, paper keeps people honest, or at least it gives you something to hit them with when they lie. So when the envelope showed up in my mailbox, thick and official with the company logo in the corner, my first thought wasn't grief. It was confusion. My father had been dead for 3 weeks. At least, that's what the sheriff said. At minimum missing, the sheriff corrected, the last time I'd pushed. But we've got enough to call it. Enough meant my dad's truck parked crooked at the silo yard with the driver door open. Enough meant his hard hat on the ground like someone had dropped it mid-step. Enough meant boot prints on the catwalk that ended at the edge and didn't come back. It still didn't feel real. I stood at my kitchen counter and slid a finger under the envelope flap, like I was opening a bill. My hands didn't shake until I saw what the letterhead said. Prairie Gold Grain Co-op. Final shift documentation. Required acknowledgement. Inside was a single printed page on carbonless form paper, the kind that smudges if you touch it wrong. Dad's name was typed at the top. Employee, Harold Bennett. Employee ID, 0417. Date, 10 tone. Shift, 3rd night. Most of the usual boxes were there. Equipment status. Bin temperature, moisture readings, incident summary. Except none of it was filled out in English. The entire report, every line, every note, every incident summary, was written in a script I didn't recognize. Not even an alphabet, really. The letters had loops and jagged hooks, like someone tried to combine cursive with claws. Some characters repeated, but not in a way that looked like normal words. There were diacritics, little dots and strokes, above the lines, and a strange habit of stacking symbols like fractions. The bottom of the page was worse. In the signature box, where my father would normally scribble his name in angry block letters, there was no signature. Just one repeated sequence of symbols, stamped 3 times in dark ink. Each stamp slightly offset like someone had done it fast. It looked less like a signature, and more like a seal. And in the margin someone, my father I assumed, had written in pen. In English, the only English on the page. Do not read out loud. I stared at that line until my eyes burned. Dad wasn't the kind of man who left cryptic notes. If he told you not to do something, he explained why. If he didn't, it meant he didn't have time, or he didn't think you'd listen. I sat down at the table and read the printed dead language again, trying to find anything familiar. It didn't match the few languages I'd seen in college textbooks. It wasn't Latin. It wasn't Greek. It wasn't Hebrew. It wasn't Cyrillic. It looked like something older than old. My first, dumb impulse was to take a picture and send it to a language subreddit. My second impulse, stronger, was to listen to my father. I folded the paper carefully, like it was brittle, and stuck it back in the envelope. Then I reread the cover letter that had been tucked behind it. It was a generic corporate note, signed by someone in HR whose name meant nothing to me. It expressed condolences. It mentioned closure. It requested that I sign the attached acknowledgement, that all final documentation has been provided. There was a line near the bottom that made my stomach tighten. Per facility policy, employee shift reports are archived on-site for 30 days. If you have any questions, please direct them to your site foreman. I drove to Prairie Gold that afternoon. The co-op sat outside a town so small it barely qualified as a dot. Flat Kansas fields spread out in every direction, brown and gold, and the sky felt too big for anything bad to hide in. And then the silos rose into view. 6 grain bins like dull silver bullets planted in the earth. Catwalks connecting them. Conveyors and augers and ladders bolted to the sides. From a distance, it looked like an industrial sculpture. Up close, it looked like a throat. I parked in the gravel lot beside a row of dusty pickup trucks, and stepped out into wind that smelled faintly of grain dust. Somewhere inside the facility, Machinery hummed low like a giant sleeping animal. The office was a prefab building with a coffee-stained counter and a bulletin board full of safety notices. Nobody read. A man behind the desk looked up as I entered. He was in his late 50s, face weathered, eyes ringed with exhaustion. He wore a Prairie Gold cap that looked older than me. "Can I help you?" he asked. "My name's Mason Bennett," I said. Harold Bennett was my father. The man's face tightened. Not surprise, something like dread. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I know who you are." That wasn't comforting. "I got this in the mail," I said, and I slid the envelope across the counter. His eyes flicked to the logo, then to my hands, then to my face. He didn't touch it at first. "Who sent that?" he asked quietly. "Har," I said. "They said his shift report's archived on-site. I want to see the originals." The man swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed like he'd taken a dry pill. "You shouldn't be here," he said. I stared at him. "Excuse me." He exhaled through his nose and finally took the envelope, but he handled it like it was dirty. He slid the report out, glanced at the dead language, and his face went pale in a way that made me instantly colder. "You didn't read it aloud," he said. It wasn't a question. "No," I replied, throat tight. "My dad wrote not to." The man looked up at me, eyes sharper now. "Good." He set the paper down and leaned closer across the counter, lowering his voice until it was barely above the hum of the fluorescent lights. "Listen to me," he whispered. "Your dad was the best worker I ever had. He was obsessive about his logs. If he wrote that, he meant it." My mouth went dry. "What language is it?" The man's lips pressed together. He hesitated, then said, "It's not for you." I felt anger flare. "It's my father." His eyes flicked toward the window that looked out at the silos, and the exhaustion on his face turned into something else. "Fear, maybe, or guilt," he whispered. "Your dad didn't write this for you." My stomach clenched. "What do you mean?" The man swallowed hard and glanced around the office, as if checking whether the walls could hear. Then he leaned even closer, and said the words that made the hair on my arm stand up. "He wrote it for them." I stared at him, heart hammering. "Who's them?" I asked. The foreman's mouth opened, then the lights in the office flickered once, sharp and fast. His eyes snapped to the ceiling. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Don't ask that in here." And from somewhere deep in the facility, beyond the office walls and the rows of grain bins, I heard a sound that didn't belong in a place like this. A low, steady rustle, like grain pouring. Only it wasn't coming from any auger or conveyor. It was coming from inside the bins, as if something down there had started moving on its own. The foreman didn't move until the rustling stopped. It faded the way a wave fades on a beach, present, then thinner, then gone, like it had never been there. The hum of machinery underneath it continued, steady and normal, like the place was daring me to say I'd heard anything strange. The foreman exhaled slowly, eyes still fixed on the window. Then he folded my father's report back into the envelope and slid it toward me without meeting my gaze. "You came for the originals," he said. "Yes." He rubbed his face with one hand, hard, like he could wipe off whatever expression I'd seen. When he lowered his hand, his voice had the tone of a man switching into procedure, because procedure was safer than truth. "Office copies are in the file cabinet," he said. "Originals are in the control room." "But you're not going up there alone." I blinked. "Why?" He finally looked at me. The fear in his eyes wasn't theatrical. It was the same fear you see in people who've watched someone else die in a way they can't explain. "Because your dad wasn't alone," he said quietly. "Not at the end." My throat tightened. "Who was with him?" The foreman's mouth twitched like he wanted to say a name and was physically stopping himself. "A shift partner," he said instead. "Guy named." He cut himself off and glanced upward again, like the ceiling might have ears. Then he said, "You can call him Roy. He's retired. Lives 2 miles down the county road." Roy. A placeholder name. My stomach rolled. The foreman grabbed a key ring from a hook and nodded toward the door. "Come on, quick." Outside, the Kansas wind hit me full in the face, sharp with dust. The silos loomed higher than they had from the parking lot, and the catwalks between them looked thin and exposed against the sky. The foreman led me across the gravel yard toward the base of bin 4. As we walked, I noticed something that didn't fit. There were rules posted everywhere, bright OSHA signs, lockout tagout required. Confined space entry prohibited without permit, respirators required during fumigation. But there were also other signs, smaller, older, faded paper taped behind the official notices, like someone had slipped them in quietly. No letterhead, no logos, just plain printer paper with bullet points. The foreman saw me reading and snapped. "Don't. Those aren't OSHA," I said anyway. He didn't deny it, he just looked tired. "Those are the rules nobody signs." "Why?" I asked. He hesitated, then said, "Because if we write them down officially, the company has to answer for why they exist." My stomach tightened. "And why do they exist?" The foreman's gaze flicked to the bins again, like he was measuring whether it was safe to speak near them. Then he said, flat and quiet, "Because something here doesn't like being talked about." He unlocked a metal door at the base of bin 4 and ushered me into a narrow corridor lined with electrical panels. The air smelled like hot metal and grain dust. Fans whirred somewhere overhead. "Before we go up," he said, "you need to understand something." I waited. He took a folded sheet of paper from his back pocket, not an official form. One of those faded rule sheets. He smoothed it against the wall and tapped it with a dirty fingernail. "Your dad knew these," he said. "He followed them, until he didn't." My throat tightened. "Show me." The paper was worn, creased, and stained with fingerprints. The title at the top read, "Night Shift Guidelines, Prairie Gold Unofficial." The first few lines were mundane enough to feel like normal safety culture. Never climb a bin ladder alone. Always radio before crossing the catwalk. If the intercom hisses, assume it's faulty wiring and do not respond. Then it turned. Do not use the PA system after sundown. If you hear a second set of footsteps on the catwalk, stop moving and wait. Do not look down into the access hatches. If grain shifts without augers running, log it as thermal settling. I swallowed. Thermal settling. The foreman's voice was bitter. That's what the company calls it. I kept reading. Never open hatch. 3B after 11 p.m. If the grain sings, record it as compressor resonance. Do not record audio. Do not whistle back. If you find writing that isn't yours on a tag or checklist, do not erase it. Bring it to the foreman. My skin prickled. Writing. The foreman washed my face. That's what your dad started finding. I looked down at the last rule, the one typed in darker ink, as if it had been added later. Do not read the old language aloud. If you do, the bin will answer. My mouth went dry. I looked up. Old language. The foreman didn't blink. That's the dead language on your dad's report. My throat tightened. So you've seen it before. He hesitated, then nodded once. Not that much of it. Usually it's a word here, a symbol on a maintenance tag. Your dad's report, he trailed off, swallowed. That was a whole page. I stared at the paper. What happens if you read it aloud? The foreman's eyes flicked toward the ceiling again. It answers, he said simply. A chill crawled up my spine. Okay, I forced out. Take me to the originals. He nodded, but before he moved, he added something that felt like a warning disguised as advice. When we get to the control room, he said, you don't touch the intercom. I swallowed. Why? His jaw tightened. Because it remembers voices. We climbed. The ladder up to the catwalk was bolted to the side of bin 4. Each rung was cold metal. Wind slapped at my jacket as we rose higher. The yard shrank beneath us until the pickups looked like toys. When we stepped onto the catwalk, it swayed slightly under our weight. The foreman moved like someone who'd done this thousands of times. I moved like someone trying not to die. Halfway across, he stopped and held up a hand. I froze. For a moment, there was nothing but wind. Then, I heard it. A faint rustle, like cloth. But there was no cloth. It sounded like something moving on the catwalk behind us. My skin prickled. The foreman didn't turn around. He didn't look back. He just stood perfectly still, hands still raised. The rustle stopped. The foreman exhaled slowly. "Keep moving," he said, voice tight. I didn't ask questions. We reached the control room, a small metal box perched between bins with windows looking out over the facility. Inside were monitors, gauges, and a wall. Mounted intercom, with a microphone hanging like a tongue. The foreman went straight to a locked cabinet and pulled out a folder. He opened it and slid out the shift logs. Most were typed in English. Dates, readings, minor maintenance notes. Then he reached the last page. My father's final shift report. The dead language page. Seeing it on the table under fluorescent light made it feel less like a prank and more like an infection. I leaned closer and noticed something I hadn't seen before. Along the bottom edge, beneath the printed symbols, my father had written a line in pencil, so faint I almost missed it. Not English. A crude phonetic spelling, like he'd been trying to sound it out. My stomach clenched. He was translating it. The foreman watched me notice. His voice was low. "Your dad was obsessed toward the end. He kept a notebook, wrote down symbols, tried to match them to sounds." "Where is it?" I asked. The foreman hesitated, then opened another drawer and pulled out a small spiral notebook with a cracked plastic cover. He slid it across the table like it was evidence. On the cover, in my father's handwriting, it read, choke point words. "Do not speak." I opened it carefully. The pages were filled with my father's blocky notes and clumsy sketches of symbols. Columns labeled mark, sound, when found, response. Some lines were crossed out violently. Others had no written beside them in heavy pen. And near the middle, a phrase had been circled and underlined 3 times. "If you read it aloud, the bin will answer." Beneath that, in my father's handwriting, was a partial translation. Not a shift report. Not for management. For the one under the grain. My throat tightened so hard, it hurt. The foreman's voice dropped to a whisper. "That's why I said he wrote it for them," he said. And from the intercom speaker on the wall, which none of us had touched, came a soft burst of static. Then, faintly, barely more than a breath, something tried to form a syllable. My father's syllable. The sound he'd been spelling out. The foreman's hand shot up, palm out, like he could stop sound with a gesture. "Don't," he whispered. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stared at the intercom speaker, as if my eyes could keep it quiet. The static hissed again, soft and wet like sand sliding over metal. It didn't sound like a normal radio glitch. It sounded intentional, like a throat clearing before speech. The foreman lunged to the wall and yanked the intercom power switch down. The speaker went dead instantly. Silence slammed into the room. My heart kept pounding anyway. The foreman held the switch down with his thumb, like he didn't trust it to stay off on its own. His voice was low and urgent. "You see why?" he said. I swallowed hard. It was trying to talk. The foreman's eyes were rimmed red with exhaustion. "It always tries," he murmured. "You give it a chance, it learns you. Your dad. He gave it a lot of chances." My mouth went dry. "Why didn't you stop him?" The foreman flinched like I'd hit a bruise. "I did," he hissed, over and over. "But management kept pushing for higher throughput, more night shifts, fewer people, and your dad," he swallowed. "Your dad thought if he could understand it, he could control it." I stared at the notebook on the table. Choke point words. Do not speak. Dad had been decoding something. The rest of them treated like a superstition. A pressure change rolled through the control room, so subtle, I might have imagined it if the windows hadn't flexed slightly in their frames. The foreman's eyes snapped to the glass. "You feel that?" I did. It was like the air had thickened, then released. Like the silo had inhaled. "Jesus," I whispered, then clamped my mouth shut. The foreman shut his eyes for a beat, as if hearing the word made him tired. "Don't swear in here," he said. He stopped himself. I swallowed. "It what?" He stared at me, then at the intercom switch under his thumb. "It likes strong words," he said finally. "Words with weight. My skin prickled. I looked down at the dead language report again. The symbols seemed sharper now, like my eyes had adjusted, and could see how deliberate the patterning was. Repetition structure, lines that weren't random. A language. Not dead. Waiting. What happens now? I asked quietly. The foreman exhaled through his nose. Now you go home, he said. You sign the HR acknowledgement like they want, and you forget this page exists. I stared at him. You think I can forget? His mouth tightened. I think you should try. My stomach churned. What did the sheriff tell you about my dad? The foreman's face tightened again, and I realized he hadn't actually said the word dead. He'd said end. He'd said not alone. He'd said wrote it for them. We didn't find a body, he said quietly. We found his helmet, his gloves, his badge. My dad's badge, I repeated. The foreman nodded. Right at the edge of the catwalk, like it had been placed there. My skin crawled. Did anyone else see anything? The foreman's jaw worked. Roy did. The placeholder name again. Can I talk to him? I asked. The foreman hesitated, then nodded once. After we get off the catwalk, he said. Not in here. He gathered the dead language report, the notebook, and the unofficial rule sheet into a tight stack, like he wanted to minimize their exposure. He shoved them back into the cabinet and locked it. You don't take any of this, he said. You can read it here, that's it. Why? I asked. His eyes flicked to the windows again. Because things follow paper, he said. I wanted to laugh. I didn't. We stepped back out, onto the catwalk. The wind hit hard, colder now. Clouds had thickened to the west, the kind that built storms without warning on the plains. As we crossed, I kept my eyes forward and my hands on the rail. The metal was rough under my palm, nicked by years of use. Halfway across, my foot caught on something. A gouge in the metal catwalk rail. Fresh and bright where the galvanized coating had been torn away. I stopped, heart hammering. The foreman kept walking, then realized I wasn't behind him. He turned sharply. What? He hissed. I pointed at the gouge. 4 numbers, carved deep into the rail. My father's employee ID. My mouth went dry. That's new. The foreman's face drained of color. He stepped closer, stared at the carving, then looked down at his own hands like he expected to find a tool there. Nobody carved that, he whispered. My stomach churned. Then how? Don't, he snapped, and he grabbed my sleeve, pulling me forward. Don't stand still. We moved quickly off the catwalk and down the ladder to the yard. As soon as my boots hit gravel, my lungs felt like they could work again. The open sky made the place feel less claustrophobic, less like a mouth. The foreman didn't stop walking until we were back inside the office. He shut the door and locked it. Then he pulled out his phone and dialed a number from memory. No saved contact name. He held the phone to his ear and waited. When someone answered, he spoke into the receiver with forced calm. It's me, he said. He's here. A pause. Then quieter. Yeah, the kid. Another pause. The foreman's eyes flicked to me, then away. Bring the book, he said. My stomach dropped. What book? The foreman didn't answer. He ended the call and put the phone away, like he hadn't just changed the entire day. He leaned his elbows on the counter and stared at the floor for a long moment, breathing slow. Finally, he looked up at me. His voice was low and heavy. Roy's coming, he said, and you're going to listen to him. I swallowed. Will he tell me what happened to my dad? The foreman's mouth tightened. He'll tell you what your dad was doing, he said, and why he wrote that report in a dead language. A knock sounded on the office door. Just one. The foreman flinched, like he'd been struck. Then, a second knock. And for the briefest moment, through the glass window of the office door, I saw movement outside. Something tall passing by in the yard, shadowed by the bins. The foreman didn't go to the door. He whispered, barely audible. It's too early. The intercom speaker in the control room was off. But a soft static hiss still seemed to crawl through the walls. And my phone, sitting in my pocket, vibrated once, like a message arriving. When I pulled it out, The Notes app was open. A new line had been typed without me touching it. Is listening. Then, beneath it, in a symbol I recognized from my father's report, a hook and loop character like a clawed question mark. Another line appeared. Not English. But I understood it anyway. Come up. I didn't tell the foreman about my phone. Not right away. Part of me wanted to shove it in his face and demand he explain how a Notes app could type by itself. The other part, the part that had listened to my father my whole life, knew that showing someone proof was the fastest way to make them start lying. So I slid the phone back into my pocket and tried to keep my face still. The foreman stood behind the counter like a man bracing for a storm. His eyes kept flicking to the office door and the window beyond it, where the silos loomed like dull silver cliffs. The knocking didn't come again. That should have been comforting. It wasn't. It felt like the knock had been a reminder, a test. A finger tapping the glass of an aquarium. Minutes passed. Then the office door opened without the bell chime. Whoever came in moved carefully, like they knew sound mattered. He was older than the foreman, mid-60s maybe, broad-backed with hands that looked permanently stained by work. He wore a denim jacket and a cap pulled low. His face was lined and tired, but his eyes were sharp in a way that didn't match retirement. He carried a book under his arm. Not a notebook. Not a binder. A real book, thick, worn, cloth-bound, with no title on the spine. The foreman exhaled like he'd been holding his breath. Roy, he said. Roy didn't look at him. He looked at me. His gaze lingered on my face for a second too long, as if he was checking whether I matched something he'd seen before. Then he nodded once. Harold's boy. I swallowed. Mason. Roy didn't repeat my name. He stepped to the counter, set the book down, and kept his hand resting on it like it might run away. You got the report, Roy said. Yes. Roy's jaw tightened. You read it? No, I said quickly. Not out loud. And not really at all. It's not English. Roy nodded slowly, as if that was the correct answer on a test. The foreman leaned forward. Tell him, he said quietly, before he starts doing what Harold did. Roy's mouth twisted at the name, but he didn't correct it. He looked at me and spoke in a low, careful tone. Your father wrote that shift report in a dead language because English doesn't work, he said. Not for what's under those bins. My stomach clenched. What's under the bins? Roy didn't answer directly. He opened the cloth-bound book. Inside were pages filled with the same script as the report. Symbols, loops, hooks. But here, the text was laid out like scripture, paragraphs, headings, margins full of notes in old handwriting. Roy flipped to a page, marked with a ribbon. This, he said, tapping the script with one thick finger, ain't dead. My throat tightened. What is it? Roy hesitated, then said, It's a liturgy. The word made my skin prickle. Like a prayer? I asked. Roy nodded once. Like a set of words meant to be said in a certain place, he said. To keep something where it belongs. The foreman swallowed hard. Roy. Roy held up a hand without looking at him. He asked. Roy's eyes stayed on mine. Kansas is flat, he said. People think flat means empty, but flat just means the dirt's honest about what it covers. He turned a page. A rough diagram was drawn in the margin, a circle with lines radiating out like spokes. Beneath it, in faint English handwriting that looked older than both of us, were the words, Choke point Tuvin throat, Civi bin. My stomach dropped. Throat. Roy nodded. That's what it is, he said. A throat. A place where things pass through grain dust. Names. My skin crawled. Names. Roy's jaw tightened. You ever hear old folks talk about giving something your name? Like you speak your name into the dark and the dark speaks back. I thought of my father's note. Do not read out loud. I thought of the intercom, trying to form his syllable. I swallowed. Yes. Roy leaned closer, voice lower. This place takes names, he whispered. Not right away. It starts by learning them. Then it starts using them. The foreman's face was gray. Roy continued. Long time ago, before this co-op, before the town, there was a pit here. Folks dug for something they didn't understand. Not oil, not water. He paused, and I could tell he hated the words he was about to say. Bones, Roy said quietly. My stomach turned. Roy tapped the book again. This language belongs to the people who buried those bones, he said. Not the tribe you'll find on a plaque at a museum, older, smaller. A group that didn't want their dead to stay dead. The foreman whispered, Jesus. Roy's eyes flicked to him sharply. Don't, he snapped, then softened slightly. Not here. I stared at the book, at the script that matched my father's report. How did you get this? I asked. Roy's mouth tightened. Found it, he said, years ago. In the old elevator basement before they poured concrete and called it renovation. He ran his thumb along the page. Your father found the same book. Not this one. Another copy. That's when he started writing down symbols. My throat tightened. He was translating it. Roy nodded. He thought if he could translate it, he could fix it, he said. Like a man reading a manual. The foreman's voice was tight, and he made it worse. Roy didn't deny it. He got proud, Roy said. He thought knowing the words meant owning them. My stomach churned. So what's the shift report? Roy's eyes hardened. Not a report, he said. It's a script. A script for what? Roy's gaze flicked toward the silos beyond the office walls. For keeping the throat closed, he said. The foreman whispered, Roy, don't. Roy ignored him. He flipped to another page where the script was arranged in short lines. Like verses. Roy tapped one line, then looked at me. This line means, he said slowly, shift ends when you trade your name. My throat tightened. Traded to who? Roy's eyes stayed on mine. To the one under the grain, he said. A cold wave ran through my body. So my dad. Roy's jaw clenched. He didn't say dead. He didn't say gone. He said, your father finished his shift. My stomach dropped. The foreman's voice was barely audible. Harold tried to write it in English at first, he said. Like a normal report. It didn't accept it. Roy nodded grimly. English is for people, he said. That language is for the throat. I swallowed hard. If it's a liturgy, why can't I just destroy it, burn the book? Roy's expression hardened. Because it's not in the book, he said. The book is just instructions. He leaned closer, voice low and final. The language is in the bins now, Roy whispered. On tags, on rails. In static. In paper, in your phone if it wants. My stomach twisted, because I remembered the line typed into my notes app. Is listening. Come up. Roy watched my face, and seemed to understand something without me speaking. You got a message, didn't you? He said. It wasn't a question. I swallowed, yes. Roy nodded once, grim. It wants you on the catwalk, he said. It always wants the family up there. The foreman's hands clenched into fists. We can call the sheriff. Roy cut him off, hard. And tell him what? That a grain bin is speaking in dead scripture. He'll call it an accident report and close the case. Roy slid the book toward me, but didn't let go. Listen, he said, voice rough. If you go up there tonight, you don't speak, you don't swear, you don't pray, you don't say your own name, not even in your head. My mouth went dry. What do I do then? Roy's eyes were steady and sad. You finished the report, he said. The foreman's face went pale. Roy, no. Roy's grip tightened on the book. Harold left it half. Finished, he said. That's why it's reaching. That's why the static's getting worse. The throat is open. He looked at me. And the only thing it respects, Roy whispered, is procedure. Outside the office, the wind shifted, and the silos gave a low metallic groan as they flexed. It sounded, for a moment, like a giant clearing its throat, and I realized the dead language wasn't dead at all. It was hungry. I didn't plan to climb the silo that night. If I'd been thinking like a normal person, I would have driven home, called a lawyer, called a journalist, called anyone who could turn what Roy was saying into something other than a nightmare. But normal thinking only works in normal places. Prairie Gold wasn't normal, and my dad wasn't coming back, just because I wanted him to. The storm rolled in at sundown, classic Kansas. a dark bank of clouds that swallowed the horizon and dragged cold wind behind it. The foreman told everyone to clear out early, said lightning and catwalks didn't mix. Trucks rolled out of the yard, taillights blinking red through dust and dusk. By 8 o'clock, it was just the three of us. Me, the foreman, Roy. Roy stood in the office with his cloth-bound book open, tapping the page my father had been working on, those short verse lines of the dead language. The report has a route, he said, like a checklist, like a round. The foreman's hands were shaking as he poured stale coffee into 3 paper cups. This is insane, he muttered. This is... Roy snapped his gaze up. Don't. The foreman shut his mouth. He set the cups down anyway, like the act of offering coffee could make this feel like a normal late shift. Roy looked at me. You got his notebook. I nodded and held it up. Choke point words. Do not speak. Roy flipped through it quickly, scanning my dad's notes like he was reading a medical chart. Yeah, he murmured. He was close, too close. The foreman swallowed. Roy, we don't have to do this. Roy didn't look at him. We do, he said quietly. If you leave it open, it spreads. My stomach tightened. Spreads where? Roy's eyes flicked to my pocket where my phone sat. Wherever people write, he said. The foreman exhaled hard and looked at the ceiling like he wanted to become the kind of man who believed in God again. Just long enough to beg for mercy. Roy closed the book and tucked it under his arm. No intercom, he said. No radios unless you have to. And if you hear the grain singing, don't whistle back, I finished, remembering the unofficial rules sheet. Roy nodded once, grim. And if you hear a voice that sounds like Harold, he said, you treat it like static. My throat tightened. You think it can mimic him? Roy's eyes were hard. I know it can, he said. We stepped out into the yard. The wind had picked up. Dust and chaff blew across the gravel like low fog. Lightning flickered far off, lighting the bins in brief, harsh flashes that made them look like bones. We crossed to bin 4 and began to climb. The ladder rungs were cold enough to sting through my gloves. Above us, the catwalk disappeared into darkness. The only light came from the yard lamps and the occasional lightning flare. Halfway up, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I froze. Roy hissed, "Don't touch it." I didn't. I kept climbing, hands shaking. When we stepped onto the catwalk, it swayed under our weight. The wind hit harder up here, tearing at my jacket like it wanted to peel me open. Roy moved with steady, practiced steps. The foreman followed, like a man walking toward his own execution. I kept my eyes on Roy's boots. No looking down. No staring into hatches. We reached the control room, and Roy unlocked it with a key. The foreman didn't seem to know existed. Inside, the fluorescence flickered weakly. The intercom on the wall sat dark, power switch still off. The hum of machinery sounded deeper tonight, more like a low breathing. Roy set his book on the table and pointed to the dead language report, locked in the cabinet. Your dad wrote the wrong thing at the end, Roy said. Or he stopped before he wrote the right thing. The foreman's voice was thin. What's the difference? Roy's jaw clenched. The difference is whether the throat stays shut. He pulled the report out and laid it beside his book. Then he opened my dad's notebook to the page with the phonetic spellings. Harold tried to sound it out, Roy murmured. That's why the intercom started using his syllables. He fed it pronunciation. My stomach dropped. So what do we do? Roy's eyes met mine. We don't speak it, he said. We mark it. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a metal plate, thin, stamped. Like a label you'd bolt onto a machine. The plate had the dead language pressed into it in raised crisp symbols. The book tells you what line seals it, Roy said. You don't read it, you don't say it, you install it. The foreman stared at the plate, like it was radioactive. Where? Roy pointed toward the hatch. Labeled 3B on the control panel. The one. The rules said never to open after 11. My throat tightened. It's not even 11 yet. Roy's expression was grim. It doesn't care about clocks, he said. It cares about shift procedure. Lightning flashed outside the window, and for a moment I saw the catwalk rail where my dad's ID had been carved. The bright gouges looked like fresh wounds. Roy pressed the plate into my hands. "Harold's bloodline goes," he whispered. "That's the rule it wrote, whether we like it or not." My mouth went dry. "Why me?" Roy's eyes were sad. "Because it already knows your voice," he said. The foreman swore softly under his breath. Roy snapped. "Stop." The foreman clamped his mouth shut, so hard his jaw clicked. We left the control room and crossed the catwalk toward Bin 3. S-Access hatch. The wind screamed now, and the storm's leading edge had arrived. Thunder rolled low, long, like something huge shifting underground. We reached the hatch platform. It was a small square of metal with a waist, high rail, and a hatch door bolted shut. The hatch label read 3B. My fingers shook as I knelt, and started to loosen the bolts with the wrench Roy handed me. They came off too easily, like they'd been loosened already. My stomach dropped. The hatch lifted with a soft groan, and a wave of warm air rose up. Wrongly warm, smelling like sweet rotten dust. Then the grain beneath us moved. Not like settling, like breathing. A low vibration rose through the metal platform, into my knees. And beneath that vibration, a sound emerged. Not machinery, not wind. A faint harmonic tone, like a choir humming through a closed door. The grain was singing. Roy's face went pale. The foreman's eyes went wide and wet. Roy leaned close to my ear and whispered, "Don't answer it." A voice crackled through the radio clipped to the foreman's belt. One we hadn't turned on. "Maintenance," it said, in my father's voice, calm and familiar. "You missed a step." The foreman made a broken sound. Roy grabbed the radio and hurled it into the open hatch, without thinking. The singing shifted into something sharper, like an angry inhale. I clutched the stamped plate in my hands, heart hammering, and realized the worst part. It didn't need the radio. It had my father's voice already, and it was using it to guide me, like a foreman walking me through a procedure that ended with my name being traded. The radio disappeared into the hatch, with a soft metallic clatter that should have echoed. It didn't. The grain swallowed the sound. Like a mouth closing, the singing stopped for half a second, then resumed, lower now, steadier, like it was pleased we'd fed it something. Roy's jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscles jump. He stared into the open hatch without looking directly down, like his eyes had rules too. The foreman was trembling, hands white knuckled on the railing. His lips moved silently, like he was praying without letting sound escape. Lightning flashed again, close enough to light the inside of the hatch, for a fraction of a second. For that fraction, I saw something that did not belong in grain. Not a body, not bones. A pattern. Dark lines pressed into the grain's surface, arranged in the same looping hooked script as my father's report, as if the dead language was being written across the grain itself by something underneath. My stomach lurched. Roy's voice was low and tight. "We don't have long." I swallowed hard. My fingers were numb around the stamped plate. "What do I do?" I whispered. Roy snapped his gaze to me. "Don't whisper," he hissed. "It counts." I clamped my mouth shut so hard my teeth ached. Roy pointed to the hatch rim, one specific bolt hole on the metal flange. "Plate goes there," he said, slow and clear. "2 bolts. Tight, then you close." My hands shook as I positioned the plate over the bolt holes. The raised symbols caught the lightning light like embossed scars. I fitted the first bolt through and started turning the nut with the wrench. It tightened, then loosened on its own. My stomach dropped. I tightened again, loosened again. The metal vibrated under my palm. The singing rose in pitch, like laughter trying to become sound. Roy's eyes narrowed. He stepped closer and grabbed my wrist, guiding my movement with steady pressure. "Don't fight it like a person," he murmured. "Fight it like a machine." Machine. Procedure. Paper. I forced myself to breathe, to think like my dad. Torque, leverage, sequence. I tightened the bolt in quarter turns, not all at once, alternating pressure between both holes. The bolt stopped loosening. The first nut held. My heart hammered. Roy nodded once, approving. I moved to the second bolt. As soon as the wrench bit, the intercom speaker back in the control room still powered off, let out a soft hiss. Not loud. A whisper of static carried by the wind through the catwalk. Then, underneath it, a syllable formed. Not my father's this time. Mine. A rough imitation of my voice. My cadence. My mouth went dry. The foreman made a small strangled sound. Roy's eyes flashed. He leaned toward the foreman and mouthed, "Don't." The foreman clamped his jaw shut. I kept tightening. The second bolt held. For a moment, the singing dipped. The grain's vibration shifted, like it had hit resistance. I felt a surge of relief, so sharp it made me dizzy. Then the hatch rim grew warm. Not sun warm, not friction warm. Alive, warm, like skin. The metal under my glove felt slightly tacky, like humidity. Roy's face went pale. "Close it," he said. I reached for the hatch lid, and the hatch lid lifted upward on its own. Not ripped from my hands violently, just rising, slow and smooth, like it was being opened from below with patient strength. The warm, sweet rotten air surged out stronger, and with it came a new sound. A voice, right beneath the hatch opening, speaking in the dead language. Not static, not garbled, clear. A sentence shaped by those hooked symbols, spoken with wet familiarity, like it had always been waiting for a human throat to copy. The foreman's eyes rolled back slightly, like he was going to faint. Roy snapped, "No," but he didn't shout it. He didn't give the voice weight. He stepped forward and slapped the hatch, lid down hard with both palms. The lid hit the flange and bounced. Something pushed from below again. Roy shoved harder, muscles straining. The hatch bucked, like a living thing, trying to open its mouth. Roy's teeth were clenched, breath hissing through his nose. He jerked his head toward me. "Bolts," he mouthed. I dropped to my knees and began fastening the remaining bolts around the hatch rim. Hands shaking so badly the wrench clanked against metal. Each clank felt like a shouted word. The singing rose again, angry now. The hatch bucked. Roy fought it, shoulders shaking. The foreman snapped out of his paralysis and grabbed the hatch lid too, pressing down with all his weight. His face contorted with effort, tears streaming from the wind and fear. I tightened bolt after bolt, moving fast, sweating under my jacket. The dead language voice continued under the lid, muffled now, but still clear enough to make my stomach turn. It sounded like it was reciting something. Lines like a liturgy, like a shift report. And then, through the metal, I heard my father's voice again, not from a radio, not from an intercom, from beneath the hatch. "Mason," it said softly. My blood turned to ice. Roy's eyes widened. He shook his head violently. "No." The foreman whimpered, caught between terror and hope. My father's voice spoke again, closer now, pressed against the lid like lips to metal. "It's cold down here," it whispered. "Help me." My throat tightened. My hands froze mid-bolt. Everything in me surged toward that voice. It was my dad. It was his exact tone, the way he softened his R's, the way he always sounded like he was smiling slightly when he tried to calm you down. "Dad," the foreman breathed without thinking. The moment the foreman spoke, the hatch bucked violently. The bolts I'd already tightened screamed under pressure. Roy swore silently, rage in his eyes. The dead language voice beneath the hatch surged louder, layered under my father's, like two mouths speaking at once. "Mason," my father's voice said again. "Say your name so I know it's you. Say your name. Trade your name." The phrase from Roy's translation hit me like a punch. Shift ends when you trade your name. My hand shook, my mouth went dry. Tears stung my eyes, not just from wind. Roy leaned close to my ear and spoke without using my name. Voice low and urgent. "It's bait," he said. "If you answer, you're signing." The hatch bucked again. The foreman sobbed, "Harold, please." Roy snapped his head toward him and hissed, "Stop talking." The foreman clamped his mouth shut, shaking. I forced my hands to move again, and tightened the last bolt. The hatch lid finally stopped bucking. For a moment, the singing faded to a low hum. Silence pressed in. Then, Beneath the sealed hatch, a new sound emerged. A slow scrape, like something dragging a fingernail across the underside of the metal. And a voice, no longer my father's, spoke one clear English word through the steel. Not a plea, not a threat. A label. Mason. My real name. Not spoken by anyone above. Spoken from beneath the grain. Like the silo itself had tasted it. Roy's face went gray. He whispered, barely audible. It answered. And the moment it did, every sign on the catwalk around us, safety placards, bin labels, warning decals, seemed to blur for half a second, as if English was being overwritten. For a blink, the dead language was everywhere. Then the storm's thunder cracked, so loud the whole catwalk shook. Roy grabbed my sleeve and yanked me away from the hatch. Shift's not over, he whispered. And as we ran back toward the ladder, I understood with sick clarity. We hadn't sealed it. We'd completed a step. And now, it knew my name. We didn't stop running until our boots hit gravel. The ladder down felt endless. My hands slipped once on a rung, and Roy's grip on my sleeve jerked me back into place before I could fall. The foreman followed clumsily, half sobbing, face streaked with rain and dust. When we finally jumped off the last rung into the yard, the storm hit in full. Rain came sideways, stinging like thrown gravel. Lightning flashed close enough to paint the silos white for an instant. Thunder rolled immediately after, so loud it felt like a physical shove. The foreman shouted something, but the wind tore the words away. Roy grabbed my shoulder and pulled me toward the office building. Inside, he barked. We slammed through the office door, soaked and shaking. Roy locked it out of reflex and shoved the metal chair under the handle like a barricade. The foreman collapsed onto the floor, back against the counter, hands over his face. Roy didn't sit. He paced in tight circles, eyes flicking to the ceiling, to the walls, to the corners like he expected the dead language to drip out of them. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I froze. Roy's head snapped toward me. Don't. I didn't touch it. The buzzing stopped. Then started again. Not a call ringtone. Not a text ping. A steady vibration, like an insect trapped under glass. Roy's jaw clenched. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small plastic bag. Inside was a fistful of earplugs. He shoved them into my hand. Put 'em in, he said. Now. My hand shook so hard I fumbled one, dropped it, and nearly panicked until Roy grabbed another and pressed it into my palm. I jammed both earplugs into my ears. The world muffled. Rain became a distant hiss. Thunder became a soft thump. But the buzzing didn't stop. It wasn't sound. It was inside my bones. I pressed my palms to my thighs to steady myself and stared at Roy. What now? I mouthed, not trusting my voice. Roy understood anyway. He stepped closer and spoke slowly, making sure I could read his lips. Now we end it. The foreman's eyes went wide, and he shook his head violently. No, he mouthed. No, no, no. Roy's face hardened. He pointed toward the bins, through the office window. Then, he pointed to the cloth-bound book on the counter. Then he pointed to my mouth. My stomach dropped. He wanted me to read. Out loud. The one thing everyone had warned me not to do. I shook my head hard enough. My neck ached. Roy's eyes narrowed. He pulled the book open and flipped to a page marked with a black ribbon. He tapped a specific line of symbols, and then tapped the bottom margin, where someone, maybe my father, maybe someone before him, had written a note in faint English. Final closure. One voice only. No name. No name. My throat tightened. Roy leaned closer, lips forming words carefully. Not your name, not Harold's, not anyone's. Just the line. I swallowed hard. The foreman lurched up from the floor and grabbed Roy's sleeve, pleading silently. Roy shook him off. The storm rattled the office windows. Outside, through the rain blur, I could see the silos and the catwalk. For a split second, lightning lit the rail. The gouged numbers, 417, gleamed like fresh cuts. Then, in that same flash, the hatch we'd sealed seemed to bulge upward very slightly. like something under it had shifted. Roy's face went gray. He shoved the book closer to me, fingers still pressed on the line. I stared at the symbols. They looked like hooks and loops, and stacked claws. Not readable. Not safe. But my father had been sounding them out in his notebook. He'd written phonetic hints. He'd circled the choke point words. He'd tried to give himself a way to speak, without giving the throat his name. My hands shook as I pulled the notebook from my jacket pocket, and flipped to the page with the phonetic spellings. Roy nodded once, sharply. He pointed to the phonetic line that matched the symbols in the book, one my father had underlined with 3 hard strokes. I stared at the phonetics. They weren't English words, just syllables, breath shapes. My mouth went dry. If I spoke them, would the bin answer again? Would it taste my voice and decide it liked it? Roy pointed to the note again, one voice only, no name. Then he did something I didn't expect. He took a black marker from the counter and with a brutal swipe, crossed out my father's name on the shift log pinned to the bulletin board. Harold Bennett disappeared under ink. Then, Roy crossed out my name on the visitor sheet. Mason Bennett vanished under black. The foreman's name, too. Everyone in the room became a blank line. Roy looked at me with something like apology. Then he nodded once. Do it. I took a breath. Not deep, not steady, just enough. And I spoke the line. The dead language left my mouth like choking on dust. 4 syllables, then a pause, then 3 more. It didn't feel like speaking. It felt like pushing sound through a narrow pipe. The storm outside stilled for half a second. Rain didn't stop, but the wind did. Even thunder seemed to hesitate. Then the silos answered, not with words, with motion. A deep, heavy groan rolled through the metal bins, down into the earth, as if the whole facility had shifted weight. The office lights flickered. The foreman cried out silently, hands over his mouth. Roy grabbed the counter to steady himself, and from somewhere far below, beneath the bins, beneath the grain, came a sound like a massive inhale. Then, a long exhale, like a throat closing. The pressure in the air changed. The buzzing in my bones eased, like a clamp loosening. Roy's eyes widened with cautious hope. Then the intercom in the control room, miles away in the storm, screeched once. A burst of static so sharp I felt it through the earplugs. And then it went dead. For good. Outside, lightning flashed again, and in that instant I saw the catwalk rail. The gouged numbers, 0417, were gone. Smooth metal, no cuts. Like they'd never been there. The foreman sobbed, shoulders shaking. Roy exhaled slowly, eyes on the window. He mouthed. Shift closed. My throat tightened. Did it work? I whispered. And even whispering felt dangerous, but I couldn't keep it in. Roy's gaze locked on mine. His voice was quiet and steady. It worked, he said. For here. A cold wave ran through me. For here. Roy nodded toward the window, toward the endless Kansas darkness beyond the bins. This thing ain't from the co-op, he said. It's older than it. We just shut its mouth. My stomach churned. What about my dad? Roy's expression tightened. Sadness, guilt, resignation. He finished his shift, Roy said quietly. And he kept the rest of us alive long enough to pass the closure on. I swallowed hard, throat burning. The storm continued outside, but it sounded ordinary now. Just weather. Just Kansas. 3 days later, I quit my job and moved out of state. I didn't take souvenirs. I didn't keep the notebook. Roy burned the cloth-bound book in a barrel behind the office while I watched, and the smoke smelled like burnt grain and something sour underneath. I didn't go to the funeral they held for my father. There wasn't a body to bury, and I couldn't stand the idea of a headstone pretending to be closure. A month after I left, a padded envelope showed up in my new mailbox, with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, Prairie Gold letterhead. Final shift documentation. Required acknowledgement. The page was filled with the dead language again. Only this time, beneath the symbols, someone had written one line in English. Not a report. A recipe.